Hi everyone. This is our first lecture in week 4 where we will be talking about culture. So this lecture's agenda will be talking about specifically what culture is. We'll then be talking about the difference between ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, which you'll be talking about in your discussion board this week. We'll then be talking about symbolic and material culture and culture's impact on language. Culture is defined as the entire way of life for a group of people. It is often difficult for us to see our own culture, so we may not recognize the extent to which it shapes and defines who we are. For example, in your lower left-hand corner, you see a couple gentlemen. You might recognize that as being cricket, or you might not. Um, if you are super up on it, you would recognize that being the national teams of India and Pakistan. And for India and Pakistan, that cricket match between those two is incredibly important for them. But because you don't have the cultural sets of knowledge to know that, you don't immediately recognize that. In your lower right-hand corner, you see Brutus Buckeye, who is another example of the culture of the people in Central Ohio, where I live. If you lived in Central Ohio, you would immediately recognize Brutus Buckeye. If you are up on Big Ten sports, you might recognize Brutus Buckeye. But if I were to show a picture of Lobo, for example, you probably would immediately recognize him, but I probably wouldn't actually. Culture includes things such as language, standards of beauty, hand gestures, styles of dress, food, and music. If you are putting two and two together, you will recognize that culture is the stuff that symbolic interactionists are most interested in. It's important to note that culture is learned. It is learned through our lived experience. It is passed from one generation to the next through communication, not genetics. Our parents teach us to like the things that we like, or our lived experience teaches us to like the things that we like. We do not, for example, love sauerkraut because if you're German, it's not in your blood, or you don't necessarily love Mexican food because your parents are from Mexico. It is something we learn. What our comfort food is learned. It's not genetic. Ethnocentrism then occurs when a person uses their own culture as a standard to evaluate another group or individual's culture. This then leads to view that the other person's culture is weird or abnormal or bad. Ethnocentrism is a negative response to cultural stimuli. To use the term that from a couple lectures ago, ethnocentrism often occurs as a result of culture shock. Eurocentrism, then, is a specific type of ethnocentrism that overemphasizes European cultures. So, in Europe, in the United States, because we are a European-based culture, in Australia, some other places around the world that have European white-dominated cultures, they might suffer from Eurocentrism. So they might think the European-based way of doing things is the best, and might judge other ways of doing things as being inferior. That is an example of Eurocentrism. Cultural relativism, on the other hand, is the process of understanding other cultures in their own terms rather than judging it according to one's own culture. It is our goal as educators, as college educators, to encourage you to be culturally relativistic as opposed to ethnocentric. When studying any group, it is important to try to employ cultural relativism because it helps sociologists see others more objectively. You can't conduct sociology from an ethnocentric point of view because you simply don't learn anything. We see this in the early work of anthropologists and sociologists before we recognized our inherent ethnocentrism. So from like the 1800s, when we were still judging other cultures, non-European cultures, as savages and as inferior to what were effectively white cultures, that information that they collected isn't useful to us because it wasn't collected in a scientific way. It was really badly damaged by the ethnocentrism of the time. Um, and, you know, it's really rude too, aside from a scientific point of view. Okay, moving on to our next topic are components of culture. We have material culture and we have symbolic or non-material culture. Material culture are the things in our society. They're what anthropologists would call artifacts. So on your lower left-hand side, you see Volkswagen, sorry, I slipped into German. You see a Volkswagen manufacturer where they have the frames of the cars going down and they're being painted. Those are examples of material culture. Also, you can see the uniforms that the workers are wearing. Everything in that scene there, you can see it's stuff. It's material culture. And then we have symbolic, or what's sometimes called non-material culture. These are the symbols in our society. There you see the symbol for a unisex bathroom. You see the symbol for man. You see the symbol for woman, that line in between, and them combining to show you that anyone can go to the bathroom here. This is just a reiteration. Material culture includes the physical objects associated with a cultural group, such as tools, machines, utensils, buildings, and artwork. There you see material culture of Asian, I believe that looks like Japanese table setting. And then you see more European style table setting where apparently someone's intending to eat a bunch of saltines with a long fork. Symbolic culture includes ways of thinking. So these are beliefs, values, and assumptions, and ways of behaving, which are norms, interactions, and communication. We'll be talking about those kinds of things, I believe, in our next lecture. One of the most important functions of symbolic culture is to allow us to communicate through signs, gestures, and language. We'll talk about language a little bit later. Language is most definitely one of the largest components of our symbolic culture. Signs, or sometimes symbols, as they're called, include traffic signals, product logos, and these are simple-ish. They're physically simple, right? So a red octagon, which is what we call a stop sign, it's a relatively simple symbol, but it indicates a more complex idea of you are going to stop your car and brake here. Another example of a sign could be for Jews, a Star of David, or the rest of our society understands a Star of David as a symbol of Judaism too. That is an incredibly complex, it's Judaism, right? It's really complex collection of concepts condensed into two triangles laid over each other. Gestures then are signs that we make with our body, such as hand gestures, facial expressions, and the way we hold our bodies. These are signs that we make with our bodies. And it's important to note that these also carry meaning and can vary from one culture to the next. Here we have some examples of different gestures meaning very different things. So the man in the upper And this is interesting, actually. The man in the upper left-hand corner, um, he may be an Italian American telling you effectively to go screw yourself, or he could be a deaf man telling you through American Sign Language, thank you. It's kind of unclear. The Because that's the sign for thank you. Then we have a rather lewd gesture from appears to be a rocker of some sort. Then we have rock and roll concert, people giving what's commonly known rock and roll symbol. There's a lot of history with that symbol right there. Then we have an Olympian telling the group to be quiet, a lady telling probably somebody to cut it out with her finger. Note the similarity of those two gestures of the Olympian and that lady, meaning two different things. And then we have a relatively austere woman who's probably at a protest calling for peace, which is all we can really know. Finally, language is a system of communications that uses vocal sounds and gestures and written symbols. Um, Language is probably the most significant component of our culture because it allows us to communicate. I am conveying to you very complex ideas. I am thousands of miles away from you, but I'm able to communicate to you these ideas via language right now. Language is also is so important that many have argued that it shapes not only our communication but also our perceptions of how we see things. This is called the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis. Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis states that language structures thought in the ways that we look at the world. So, for example, people who live in extreme northern climates in the northern hemisphere often have many, many words for snow, but we might call it sleet, we might call it freezing rain, we might call it flurries, we might call it hard pack or soft pack, or that's just in the northern United States. People that live in more southern climates might just have the word for snow. If they're in a place where their language developed without even the word for snow, they might not even have a word for snow. That is an example of language being shaped by experience. And that is the end of this lecture. Please go on to the next lecture where I will be talking about our discussion.